Today we are making some fresh packed dill pickles. I like this recipe because it doesn't take 3 or 4 days of brining ahead of time. It does take several hours, and it calls for 12 hours at least for the cucumbers to stand. So pour the salt brine over the cucumbers and let it stand for 12 hours. But this is a great recipe, and this comes from the Complete Guide to Home Canning from the USDA. So it has the instructions for what to do and then your processing time according to your altitude.
You can also find this recipe on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website, and you can easily navigate by scrolling down and selecting from the menu Preserved by Pickling. You can also do this by clicking the hamburger menu in the upper right and going to Preserved by Pickling. Once you are on this page, scroll to the cucumber pickles and then select the recipe Quick Fresh Pack Dill Pickles. Scroll down to find the recipe.
Here are the pickles. They have been, well, they're just cucumbers still, but they have been put in the salt brine. Now in this batch, I have some that are whole, and you can see that they're maybe about 3, some of them maybe about 4 inches long. They're not very big. If you want to have whole pickles, you want to keep them pretty small in that way. The larger pickles you can slice up. And so in this container, I've got both whole and sliced, and I'm going to put them into my jars. These jars have been cleaned, washed, and they're sitting here ready to go. So I'm ready to go to the next step, which is to add some things to each jar to help them be pickly and dilly, and then we will be adding in our cucumbers. Okay, so now we're ready to add to our jars. We're going to put in 1 teaspoon of whole mustard seed and 1.5 teaspoons of dill seed, and that will help give it a dilly flavor. Now this is homegrown. I don't have a lot, so I might go a little bit light on the dill seed and add some dill weed in addition, because that will help give it the dill flavor as well. But the seeds are more potent as far as giving it the dill flavor. So if you can, you really want to use dill seed. You can sometimes find them in the grocery store around this time of year. You can find them at farmers markets, folded up and beginning to dry, that kind of thing. And dill is actually really easy to grow. You just grow it in your garden, and then you can use the fresh dill for salads and seasoning of other things. And then as it goes to seed, you pick it and allow it to dry fully. This has actually been drying for a couple of years just because I haven't used it. Or you can also buy dill seed in a jar at the grocery store usually, if you can find it. Okay, we've got 1 teaspoon of mustard seed, whole mustard seed in each jar, and I added 1.5 teaspoons of the dill seed and a half to 1 teaspoon of the dill weed in addition. So I want these really to be good and dilly. And then I've got the pint jars are here for the slices, and I've got 1 quart jar here for the whole pickles. So we're gonna get packing our jars now. Okay, so we're gonna fill our jars, and I'm just using my hands and a funnel and dropping them into the jar here. And you can kind of tamp down the jar gently to get them to kind of settle. So we'll move it kind of over here where we've got a little bit more room. Just tamp tamp it gently. You don't want to break the jar. You don't want to, you know, do it too hard. And you can also just use your fingers to kind of press down so that you can get more in there as needed. You want to fill it so that it's about a about a 1 inch headspace from the vegetables in there. And then we're going to put our brine on top to about a ½ inch. So that's obviously too many cucumbers. It's coming up over the top. And so we're going to put those in there. I could probably squeeze another one in there or two as long as they're small. So packing cucumbers for pickles can take a few minutes. So you don't want to rush the process. And you don't need to use a funnel. Sometimes, you know, it helps to get it in there without getting stuff around the rim of the jar. It's more important when you're adding your liquid to use the funnel. So packing them, and I've got some that are wide mouth and some that are regular mouth. When making pickles, it's really helpful to have some of this Ball brand pickle crisp. I've actually had this jar for a really long time. It's still great. You don't need a whole lot. You're gonna put in about 1/8 of a teaspoon per pint, or 1/4 of a teaspoon per quart. So again, it's really not a whole lot that you're putting in each jar, but it really does help keep the crispness, I've found. So we've got 1/8 of a teaspoon, and we're gonna drop it just on the top here. You can put it in the bottom of the jar when you're doing the spices too. And I mean, the instructions actually say to put the spices at the top. So you're supposed to pack them and then put in your spices, but it doesn't really matter. And I like to put them in the bottom because I'm thinking about it. Okay, so we've got 1/8 of a teaspoon in each one. And I've got my jar of whole pickles. So I'm gonna put 2 of these 1/8 teaspoons in. And then we're gonna put our brine on top. So, all right, here's our brine. It has been heating to a boil. So this contains vinegar, water, and the spices. And I like to use, you can see I've got a little tea crimper. I don't know what to call it actually, but it's what holds tea if you're steeping tea. So I use that, and I'm gonna move this now over so I can fill my jars. All right, here we are. We've got our vinegar solution. It has vinegar, water, a little bit of salt. You've brined these in salt, so you don't need an extra amount or a ton extra in your vinegar brine, but some you do need some, because it soaks in when it's doing the brining, the 12-hour brining, but then you need some of this to help make sure that they are pickly. And then this calls for a little bit of sugar as well. It helps to offset the sharpness of the vinegar, but it doesn't, sugar is also a preservative. And so we're going to just take this and ladle it over the top of our pickles. You can see it rising there, and we want it to go to about a ½ inch headspace. So just about to the top of where the pickles are in this jar. This is a wide mouth jar. So you can see I've got them basically covered, and we still have our ½ inch headspace there. So we're gonna move on and finish filling the other jars here. So I've got this almost to the top here, okay, and you can see that there's some little air bubbles popping up at the top. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take, this is a specific device for this process, but you could use a plastic knife. You're just gonna take it and push it against the side of the pickles on all 4 sides and release the air bubbles. Okay, that's really important to make sure that those are out. And now you can see that we're just about at the right headspace. We might want to add just a little bit extra to make sure that we've got it covered. Actually, I think this is good. This is just about the right headspace that we need. Okay, so we're gonna do that same process with each of our jars. Okay, let's talk about lids for a minute. So I need some wide mouth and some regular mouth lids. It doesn't matter the variety or the brand, Ball, Kerr, or other brands. You just wanna make sure that it has a good seal. The other thing I wanna point out is the instructions on the back. It says, prepare your lids. They're for one-time use only. Wash them in hot soapy water, rinse well until ready to use. So the previous lids had a pretty heavy coating of this sealant here. And so you actually had to boil them or put them in hot water and let them sit for quite a while so that would soften. But this is thin enough and yet it works. So you don't need to boil anymore. You just need to make sure that they are clean. So wash them in hot soapy water, make sure they're rinsed, and then you can go ahead and cap your jars. So again, it doesn't matter the brand. This is a Denali brand and it works great as well. So whatever you choose to use, just make sure that, that you're following the instructions for that particular brand. Okay, now before we put the lids on the jars, the caps, or the lids and the rings, we want to actually clean the rim. You know, sometimes when you're doing canning, the canning liquid will splash up around the edges, or you know, you've got a little bit of the spices or sugar or whatever it is that you've, you know, maybe crystals that haven't fully dissolved, or those spices are kind of on the edge of the jar. So it's really important just to take, I just like to use a clean paper towel, and you can use a clean cloth as long as it's been clean and unused. And then you're just gonna wipe the rims. And when I'm doing it, I often will, you know, do along the edge here. So I kind of put both fingers top and side, and then I'm gonna go around the edge of the jar. And I usually have my other hand, I'm holding my camera right now. So I usually have my other hand to help me go around. And then you can see, like, we picked up a little piece of pickle or spice there. So you wanna make sure that those kinds of things are not on the rim of the jar anymore, because that can cause sealing failures. So we're gonna clean each of these rims of the jar, and then I'm gonna put the lids on. Okay, so I have my hot soapy water here. I take my lids and I kind of hold them with some space between them, and I'm gonna swish them around. You can choose to wash your lids however makes sense for you, but to me, I've cleaned them. They're in hot soapy water, they've been agitated, and so these insides, they've been in the box, I haven't had them out. And then the space in between helps to make sure that they are, you know, can get the water swished all the way between. Then I'm gonna put on the hot water to rinse them and just kind of rinse them off a little bit. Shake them. I just don't want the whole amount of extra water. And then we're gonna come over here and we're just gonna drop each one on carefully onto those cleaned rims. So when you are putting your ring on, you don't want to wrench it on so it's really, really hard. You actually just want to have it be fingertip tight. So if you can't, and you're usually doing it like this, if you can't loosen it and tighten it with just your fingertips, it's on too tight. You need to have a little bit of spacing so that the air that's at the top of this jar can escape out during the processing, okay? So fingertip tight on all of these rings, and then we'll put them in the canner. Okay, we're ready to take our pickles and put them into the canner. So we just are gonna pick it up and move it and set it into the canner. We just wanna set it carefully. I like to start by putting it in the center and then building out from there. And I usually put it in the center and then on opposite sides so that it keeps the holder balanced, and then we'll drop them down in. Okay, and we've got them into the canner.
You do need to have about an inch worth, and half an inch to an inch worth of water covering the top of your tallest jar.
Okay, I don't know if you can hear that. It has taken almost 20 minutes for it to come up totally to temperature, but it's beginning to sound like it's boiling a little bit more in there. So we're gonna open up the lid just to check. And you can see indeed that there are some big bubbles coming, and we don't want those big bubbles happening the entire time. So I'm currently on a high. I'm gonna move it down, and I'm gonna do this kind of in stages. That's important so that we don't drop the temperature really quickly too much. But I could also press start on my timer now and get that going. And then after maybe 30 seconds, you know, we're gonna drop it down again. I know from my experience on my stove that I wanna keep it right around the 2 when I'm processing to maintain a gentle boil, kind of simmer. It doesn't need to have that big rolling boil the entire time. So I'm gonna turn this down now again to 2. So I kind of went from high down to between 4 and 6 to about the 5, and now I'm gonna drop it down to the 2. And we're just gonna let the timer go for the rest of the time. Okay, we've got about 6 minutes left on the timer, and I'm just coming to check and make sure. I can hear that they're still boiling. So you don't need to open the lid if you don't want to, but sometimes it's helpful just to double check. Yep, there's still boils going on. So we're good to go. We're gonna finish that 5 3/4 minutes. Okay, our timer just went off here. And I'm going to, the first thing I'm gonna do is just turn off the heat source here, and I'm going to remove the lid fully. So I'm gonna open it away from me and set that down over here. You can see it's still really boiling. So we're just gonna, if we were to pull this up right now, the temperature of the water here is obviously boiling. So it's at boiling temp. Over 200 degrees or close to 200 degrees. And the temperature out here in the, kitchen area is around 70, between 70 and 80, So that's quite a drop, a dramatic drop in temperature for these jars. So instead of just immediately pulling this up and out or pulling the jars up and out, that dramatic change in temperature can cause what's called siphoning. Meaning that, the bubbles will kind of come up to the top real quick and potentially push out some of the liquid, some of the herbs or spices that are inside the jar. So we want to just let this kind of settle a little bit, come back down in temperature about kind of like as it went up. So we can do it a little bit more speedily, but we're gonna let it sit like this for about 5 minutes. Then we will pull them up so that they are sitting above the heated water and with a little bit in the water for another 5 minutes. And then we're going to move them using this tool to our towel here to finish cooling. Okay, so I've just pulled these up out of the water. And again, I'm gonna let them sit for a few minutes, maybe about 5-ish, before we remove them fully from the canner. This just helps to regulate the temperature inside with the temperature that's outside here. You can see air bubbles are being released. So this is one of the reasons why it's important not to have your lids on too tight. Otherwise, that air can't finish escaping, and that's important so that it will seal. And as it comes up out of the temperature, from the hot to the cool, and releases those air bubbles really rapidly, it will seal, as you just saw happen. Okay, these jars have sat now above the canner for about 5-ish minutes, probably been a little bit longer, and now we're ready to take them out. So I'm going to use my handy dandy tool. So it's kind of like learning how to use chopsticks, I think. I'm not very good at chopsticks, but I'm good at this. So we're going to take this and open it enough to clamp it around, and you see how the curve of this matches the curve of the jar. Okay, so you're gonna just hold it, and then you can lift it straight up carefully and move it. Don't hit that. Move it to set down on your towel. Why a towel? Sometimes if you're setting it down on a cold countertop and the jar is still very hot and it touches that cold countertop, especially when it's like granite or a natural stone, it can burst the jar. Pull it up and out, and you want to leave for cooling, you know, about a 1-inch space. Okay, now the other thing to know here is that once you have set these jars down, you don't need to touch them. You don't need to come back and tighten rings or anything like that. Just let them sit. It's best to let them sit for at least 12 to 24 hours to cool. Once they have passed that 12 to 24 hours, you can wash them, remove the rings and wash them off, wash the rings, wash the jars, and make sure you label the tops of your jars, and then put them on your shelves.